Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Gravenhurst, and I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 17 years. I've seen every kind of emergency you can think of: lost hikers, broken bones, bear attacks, even a few heart attacks on the trails. But what happened on Blackwater Ridge in October of 1978 changed everything I thought I knew about these ancient mountains. People around here have always told stories about the Hollow Children, kids who died in the old mine disaster back in 1923, still playing in these woods. I never believed any of it. I figured grief just made people see things that weren't there. After all, I'm a third-generation ranger. My grandfather worked these mountains, my father too. They were practical men who dealt in facts, not ghost stories. But then again, none of them ever lost a child like I did. My Sarah drowned 8 years ago in Blackwater River. She was only 6, slipped on wet rocks while we were fishing. I tried to save her, but the current was too strong. After that, I moved out to the ranger station permanently. Couldn't stand being around town, seeing other kids playing, hearing their laughter. The mountains became my home, my refuge. That October morning started like any other. The radio crackled to life at dawn, my old Motorola HT220, reliable as a hammer. The voice on the other end belonged to Sheriff Collins from Davis. "Thomas, we've got a missing child up your way." 10-year-old girl named Emma Caldwell. Family was camping near the old Blackwater mining settlement. Parents woke up this morning, found her tent empty. I grabbed my notebook and pen. Any signs of struggle? That's the strange part. Her shoes were placed neat as you please right outside the tent, like someone invited her to come play. My blood went cold, but I kept my voice steady. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive up to Blackwater Ridge always gave me the shivers, especially this time of year. October fog rolled through, the valleys like gray fingers, and the old mining equipment scattered through the forest looked like sleeping monsters. The trees were mostly bare, their black branches reaching up like skeletal hands. I'd been up here plenty of times for searches. The ridge was 12 miles from the nearest paved road, full of deep hollows where radio signals died and cell phones were useless. If you got turned around up here, you could wander for days. The Caldwell campsite sat in a clearing near the ruins of the old mining settlement. Not much left now, just crumbling stone foundations and rusted machinery the mining company abandoned after the disaster. Back in 1923, 47 children died when their schoolhouse collapsed during a cave-in. Took 3 days to dig them out, but by then it was too late. Emma's parents, Mike and Janet, looked like they hadn't slept at all. Their tent was still set up, but you could see the empty spot where Emma's sleeping bag had been. And there, lined up perfectly outside the tent flap, were her small white sneakers. "She never goes anywhere without those shoes," Janet said, her voice shaky. "She's afraid of stepping on rocks with bare feet." I knelt down and examined the ground. Emma's footprints led away from the tent, small and clear in the soft earth. But that's where things got strange. The prints headed straight toward the old mine shaft about 50 yards away, then just stopped. I walked the perimeter twice, looking for any sign of where she might have gone next. Nothing. It was like she'd just vanished into thin air. "Has she ever sleepwalked before?" I asked. Mike shook his head. "Never. And she's scared of the dark. She wouldn't have left the tent without waking us up." I set up my search grid and called for backup on the radio. Within an hour, 3 other rangers arrived along with a search dog named Max. We'd done this dance before. Spread out in a line, walk slowly, check every hollow log and cave. Entrance. But Max started acting weird right from the start. He's a good dog, trained for this work, never failed to find a trail before. But when we got near the old schoolhouse foundation, he just froze. His fur stood up like he'd been shocked, and he started growling at empty air. "What's wrong with him?" Janet asked. I didn't have an answer. Max backed away from the ruins, whimpering, then turned and ran back to the truck. He wouldn't come near that area again, no matter how much I coaxed him. That's when I started to feel it, this wrongness in the air. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees near the mining settlement, even though the sun was shining bright everywhere else. Birds wouldn't fly over the area. And the fog. It was moving in patterns that didn't make sense, swirling around the old buildings like it was being stirred by invisible hands. By noon, we had 6 people searching, and still no sign of Emma. I'd radioed for more help, state TIA. Police were sending a helicopter, and volunteers from town were driving up. But something about this whole situation felt wrong, and it wasn't just the weird weather. I was checking the old mine shaft when my radio started acting up. Instead of normal static, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Children's voices singing "Ring Around the Rosie." The voices were faint but clear, coming through on the emergency frequency. "Base, this is Ranger Gravenhurst. You hearing this singing on Channel 7? Negative, Thomas. Channel 7's clear on our end." I switched channels, but the singing followed me. 3 or 4 young voices, maybe more, singing that old nursery rhyme over and over. When I turned the radio off completely, the singing stopped. Martha Kellaway arrived around 1 o'clock with 2 more rangers. Martha's been working these mountains for 25 years. If anyone knew the area, it was her. But when I told her about the radio voices, she got this look on her face. "Thomas, I need to tell you something," she said, pulling me aside. 20 years ago, I had a search up here too. Little boy named Billy Henderson went missing during a family picnic. Found him 3 days later, sitting by himself near the schoolhouse ruins. Was he okay? Physically, yes. But he kept talking about playing with other children. Said they taught him games and wanted him to stay forever. Thing is, there were no other children in the area. We checked. Martha's words stuck with me as we expanded the search pattern. I was working my way through a thick stand of rhododendron bushes when I found the first real clue, Emma's jacket, hanging from a tree branch 30 feet off the ground. There was no way to climb that tree. The trunk was smooth, no low branches, nothing to grab onto. But there was Emma's pink jacket, fluttering in the breeze like a flag. I called for help, and one of the younger rangers shimmed up with climbing gear to get it down. In the jacket pocket, we found a piece of paper with writing on it. "We're having so much fun, don't worry." The handwriting looked like a child's, but Emma could barely write her own name, according to her parents. This was too neat, too perfect. As the afternoon wore on, things got stranger. We found toys scattered around the mining settlement, old wooden tops, a cloth doll with button eyes, a rubber ball. But these weren't modern toys. They looked like something from the 1920s, weathered and worn but somehow still intact. The worst part was the footprints. Every area we'd already searched showed new tracks by the time we came back, small bare feet, child-sized, in the mud around the old foundations. Too many for just one kid. "How many children you think made these tracks?" asked Ranger Hopkins, kneeling by a particularly clear set. I counted them. At least 8 different sizes, maybe more. All small, all recent. "Has to be some kind of joke," Hopkins said. "Local kids messing with us." But we were 12 miles from the nearest house. No way a bunch of children had hiked all the way up here just to confuse a search party. And besides, what about Emma? Where was she? As sunset approached, I made the call to continue the search through the night. We set up floodlights around the settlement and prepared for a long haul. Emma had been missing for almost 24 hours now. In this cold, especially if she wasn't dressed properly, hypothermia would start setting in. That's when I heard her voice. I was checking the perimeter near the old schoolhouse when it came drifting through the fog. Clear as day, Emma calling for help. "Help me, please help me." I grabbed my flashlight and radio. "This is Thomas. I've got contact with the missing girl. She's near the schoolhouse." I ran toward the sound, my beam cutting through the thick fog. "Emma, keep talking, honey. I'm coming." But when I reached the schoolhouse, the ruins, there was no one there, just broken stone walls and that old rusty bell tower creaking in the wind. Then I saw them. At first, I thought it was just the fog playing tricks on my eyes. But as I got closer, I could make out shapes moving in the mist. Children, lots of them, playing some kind of game in the ruins. They were pale as moonlight, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Boys in knickers and suspenders, girls in long dresses and button-up shoes. They moved through the broken walls like the stones weren't even there, laughing and chasing each other. And there, right in the middle of them, was Emma, She looked real enough, solid, but she was playing with children who seemed to shimmer in and out of existence. I took a step forward, and every single one of them turned to look at me. Their eyes reflected my flashlight beam like water, and when they smiled, I felt something cold crawl up my spine. "Come play with us, Mr. Thomas," Emma called out. But her voice sounded different, hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I fumbled for my radio. "Base, I found Emma. She's in the schoolhouse ruins with other children." "Copy that, Thomas. We're on our way." But when I looked up, they were gone. All of them. The ruins were empty, just fog and shadows, and the sound of wind through broken stone. The backup team found me standing alone in the ruins, shining my flashlight at nothing. When I tried to explain what I'd seen, they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Maybe the stress of another missing child, the memories of Sarah, were finally getting to me. But then Martha pulled me aside again. "I saw them too," she whispered. 20 years ago, when Billy went missing, a whole group of children playing where no children should be. They looked at me the same way, like they knew something I didn't. What do you think they are? Honestly, I think they're the kids who died in the mine disaster. I think they're still here, somehow, still playing their games. The thought should have terrified me, but instead I felt something else, a strange kind of understanding. If Sarah had died here instead of in the river, would her spirit be trapped too? Would she be lonely, looking for friends? We kept searching through the night, but Emma stayed missing. Every few hours, someone would report hearing children's laughter from different parts of the settlement. Hopkins swore he saw a group of kids playing hide-and-seek behind the old company store. Another ranger found a hopscotch court drawn in the dirt that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Around 3 in the morning, I was sitting by myself near the mine shaft when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Emma walking out of the fog, but she wasn't alone. 6 or 7 other children followed her, all wearing those old-fashioned clothes. "Emma!" I stood up slowly, trying not to scare them away. "Your parents are worried sick about you." She tilted her head, studying me with eyes that seemed too old for her face. "The others want me to stay and play. They've been alone for so long." The other children gathered around Emma, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. One of them, a boy about 8 years old, stepped forward. "You're the ranger who lost his little girl," he said in a voice that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "We know about Sarah. She's not here with us, if that's what you're wondering." My heart nearly stopped. "How do you know about Sarah?" "We know lots of things. We know you blame yourself for what happened to her. We know you come up to these mountains to hide from the hurt." The boy moved closer, and I could see right through him to the trees behind. "We could help you forget all that pain. You could play with us too. Games where nobody gets hurt, where nobody dies, where nothing ever changes." For a moment, I was tempted. The idea of never feeling that crushing grief again, of Sarah's death becoming just a distant memory. It was almost too good to resist. But then I looked at Emma. She was shivering, her lips turning blue from the cold. Whatever these children were offering, it would kill her. "Emma needs to go home to her parents," I said firmly. The children's expressions changed. Their friendly smiles turned into something else. Hurt, angry, desperate. "Everyone always leaves," said a little girl with pigtails. "Everyone always chooses the sad world instead of staying with us." The temperature dropped even more. Ice crystals started forming on the trees around us. My flashlight beam grew dim, and the fog thickened until I could barely see 5 feet in any direction. "We just want friends," the boy said. "We've been waiting so long for someone to play with us forever." They started moving then, circling around Emma and me like we were part of some twisted game of duck, duck, goose. Emma looked confused, like she was waking up from a dream. "Mr. Thomas?" she said in her normal voice. "Where are we? I can't remember." "I was in my tent, and then—" "It's okay, honey. I'm going to get you home." But the hollow children weren't done with us yet. They began holding hands, forming a ring around us, singing that same nursery rhyme I'd heard on the radio. Asterisk, ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Asterisk. And with each repetition, the circle got smaller. I could feel their presence like ice water in my veins. Emma pressed against my side, trembling. "What do you want?" I shouted. The singing stopped. The boy who'd spoken before materialized right in front of me, so close I could have touched him if he'd been solid. "We want what everyone wants," he said. "We want not to be alone." The circle of children tightened around us, and I realized they were leading us somewhere. Each time I tried to step in a different direction, they would block my path, gently but firmly, guiding Emma and me deeper into the ruins. "Where are we going?" Emma whispered. I didn't answer because I was starting to understand, and the realization filled me with terror. We were walking toward the edge of Blackwater Ridge, Emma, toward the 200-foot cliff that dropped down to the rocky riverbed below. These children weren't trying to hurt Emma out of malice. They were lonely spirits who'd been trapped here for over 50 years, and they wanted her to stay with them forever. But they didn't understand that their games could kill living children. "Stop," I said, planting my feet firmly. "We're not going any further." The hollow children stopped singing, but they didn't disappear. If anything, they became more solid, more real. I could see their faces clearly now, young children with old sad eyes. Children who'd been playing the same games for decades, waiting for new friends to join them. "You don't understand," said the little girl with pigtails. "If she falls down with us, she'll never have to be scared again. She'll never have to grow up and face all the terrible things that happen in the world. She'll stay young forever, like us." "She'll be dead," I said bluntly. "Death isn't what you think it is," said the boy. "We're not really dead, we're just different. We're playing the longest game of all." I felt something cold and hard press into my hand. Looking down, I saw it was an old iron horseshoe, probably left behind from the mining days. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. She'd always told stories about how iron could protect you from spirits, how it could keep the dead from touching the living. "Emma," I said quietly, "when I say run, you run back toward the lights as fast as you can. Don't look back, no matter what you hear." But the hollow children heard me too. Their forms flickered and wavered, like candlelight in a strong wind. "You can't take her away from us," said the girl. "We've been so lonely for so long. Please don't make us be alone again." For the first time, I really looked at these children, not as monsters or threats, but as what they actually were. Kids who died scared and alone, trapped in an endless childhood with no one but each other for company. Kids like Sarah might have been. If things had been different. "I know you're lonely," I said, holding the iron horseshoe but not raising it threateningly. "I know what it's like to lose someone you care about. But Emma has parents who love her, who are scared out of their minds right now. You remember having parents, don't you?" Some of the children nodded. A few of them started to look uncertain. "When you died in the mine disaster, your parents searched for you too. They never stopped missing you. But they wouldn't have wanted you to hurt other children just so you wouldn't be alone." The boy stepped forward, his face twisted with pain. "But it's been so long, everyone forgot about us. No one even visits our graves anymore. That doesn't make it right to take Emma away from her family." The children were wavering now, some of them starting to fade. But a few held on, desperate and angry. "She wanted to play with us," the girl insisted. "She came willingly." "She's 10 years old," I said. She didn't understand what she was agreeing to. That's when Emma spoke up, her voice small but clear. "I want to go home. I want my mom and dad." The hollow children looked at each other, confused and hurt. They'd been children themselves when they died, and part of them still thought like children, unable to fully understand the consequences of their actions. "We could play with you sometimes," Emma said suddenly. "I could come visit, maybe bring some toys, but I can't stay forever. My parents would be too sad." It was the perfect thing to say. The children's faces lit up with hope, and I felt the awful, cold pressure around us start to lift. "You would come back?" asked the boy. "If Mr. Thomas says it's okay," Emma said, looking at me. I nodded, though I had no intention of ever bringing her back here. "But right now, we need to get Emma warm before she gets sick." The children stepped aside, creating a clear path back toward the searchlights. As we walked away, I heard the girl call out, "Don't forget about us again, okay? Don't let everyone forget." I turned back one more time. The hollow children were fading now, becoming transparent in the morning mist. But before they disappeared completely, I heard something that broke my heart. A whispered, "Thank you," that sounded like wind through the trees. Emma's parents cried when they saw her walking out of the fog with me. She was hypothermic and confused, with scratches on her arms from wandering through the underbrush, but otherwise unhurt. The paramedics wrapped her in blankets and took her down to the hospital for observation. When the sheriff asked what happened, Emma said she remembered playing with nice children who wanted her to stay forever. The official report listed it as a case of a confused child wandering off and getting lost in the wilderness. Missing child recovered, no signs of foul play. But I knew the truth. And more importantly, I knew those children were still up there on Blackwater Ridge, waiting for the next lost soul to wander into their games. I started researching after that. Spent hours in the library reading about the 1923 mine disaster, learning the names of the 47 children who died. I talked to older folks in town, listening to their stories about strange encounters in the mountains. Most people thought I'd gone a little crazy after Sarah's death, but a few understood. Mrs. Henderson, whose grandson Billy had gone missing 20 years ago, invited me for coffee one afternoon. Billy's 32 now, she told me. Has kids of his own, but he still won't talk about what happened up on that ridge. Says it's not that they were scary, exactly. Says they were just sad. I made some changes after that. Put up iron wind chimes around the old mining sites. Iron to keep the spirits at bay, but also as a kind of memorial. Started leaving small toys near the schoolhouse ruins, nothing expensive, just little things for lonely children to play with. The missing child incidents dropped to zero after that October. Word spread through the community, TPAs spoken carefully, quietly, but it spread all the same. Parents kept their kids closer to home during camping trips. Rangers started carrying iron objects in their packs, just in case. I never saw the hollow children again directly, but sometimes on foggy October nights, I can hear them playing in the distance, laughing, singing their old songs, content for now with the toys I leave behind. I understand something now that I didn't before. Death isn't always about moving on. Sometimes it's about being remembered. Those children weren't evil, they were just forgotten, and forgetting can be its own kind of cruelty. I still miss Sarah every day. The pain of losing her will never completely go away. But I don't hide from it anymore. Instead, I honor her memory by protecting other children, both living and dead. If you're ever camping in these Appalachian mountains and you hear children laughing in the woods at night, don't investigate. Leave some iron objects around your campsite, a horseshoe, a railroad spike, anything with iron in it. And whatever you do, don't let them invite you to play. But if you're brave enough, you might consider leaving a toy or two before you go. Nothing expensive, just something for lonely children to enjoy. Because even spirits need to know that someone, somewhere, remembers them. The mountains are full of thin places where the past and present touch. I've learned to respect those places, to understand that some games have been going on longer than any of us can imagine. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the fog rolls through the valleys, I remember that I'm not the only guardian watching over these ancient hills. My name is William Ashford, and I've been a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 21 years. I thought I knew every trick the moonshiners used to hide their stills in these Kentucky mountains. I was dead wrong. It was November 1984, and the first snow of winter was starting to dust the ridge tops. I'd been stationed in the Red River Gorge area since 1963, right after I got out of the military police. The mountains became my home after I lost my wife and daughter to a drunk driver. Maybe that's why I went so hard after the illegal liquor operations. Every jar of moonshine felt personal to me. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Sheriff's office said folks down in Slade were complaining about the smell of corn mash cooking somewhere up on Devil's Backbone. That's a nasty ridge system, about 18 miles from the nearest town, all limestone cliffs and hidden caves. Perfect place for a still. Thing is, Deputy Martinez told me over the radio, we sent federal boys up there twice already. Found nothing. But people keep smelling it, hearing machinery running at night. I'd busted 47 illegal operations in my career. Most moonshiners were just trying to make a living, but they broke federal law, and that was my job. Devil's Backbone had a reputation, though. Old-timers always warned about ghost runners protecting their territory up there. I figured it was just mountain folk trying to scare off law enforcement. The road up to Devil's Backbone was barely more than a hunting trail. My truck bounced over rocks and roots as I climbed higher into the mountains. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as I gained elevation. By the time I reached the old logging road that led to the ridge, snow was falling steady. I parked where the road ended and checked my gear. Radio, camera, evidence bags, my .38 service weapon. Standard procedure for investigating suspected moonshine operations. The silence up there was complete. No birds, no wind, just the soft sound of snow hitting pine needles. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Sour corn mash, definitely, but it came and went like the wind was carrying it from different directions. In 21 years, I'd never smelled moonshine cooking without finding the still within a quarter mile. I followed an old deer path along the ridge. The limestone cliffs dropped away on both sides, with caves and overhangs everywhere, perfect hiding spots. But after 3 hours of searching, I found nothing. No tire tracks, no footprints, no copper tubing or mason jars. Nothing. That's when I heard it, the sound of running water through pipes, coming from somewhere below the ridge. I followed the sound to a cave opening about 15 feet down the cliff face. The smell of cooking mash was stronger here. But when I climbed down and shined my flashlight inside, the cave was empty. Just bare rock walls and a few old bones from some animal that had died in there years ago. But the smell was so strong it made my eyes water, and I could swear I heard voices echoing from deep inside the cave system. Men talking in low voices, but I couldn't make out the words. I radioed back to base. "This is Ashford. I'm at the cave system on Devil's Backbone. Something's not right up here." Static crackled back at me. "Say again, Ashford. You're breaking up." When I tried the radio again, nothing. Dead silence. Cell phones weren't much use in these mountains in 1984, so I was on my own until I hiked back down to my truck. The snow was falling harder now, and the light was starting to fade. I decided to make camp and do a proper search in the morning. As I set up my tent in a clearing about a half-mile from the caves, I kept smelling that corn mash. It would hit me strong, then disappear completely. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of truck engines. Old engines, the kind that sputtered and backfired. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The sound was coming from the direction of the caves, but I couldn't see any lights through the trees. The engine sounds faded, and everything went quiet again. But when I went back to my tent, there was something that hadn't been there before. 3 mason jars sitting on a tree stump right next to my campsite. They were filled with clear liquid that smelled like the strongest moonshine I'd ever encountered. Those jars weren't there when I made camp. I was sure of it. I didn't sleep much that night. Those mason jars sat there like a warning, or maybe a gift. I couldn't tell which. When morning came, I packed them carefully in evidence bags and hiked back down to my truck to call for backup. "Federal boys went missing yesterday," Deputy Martinez told me when I finally got through on the radio. 3 agents from the ATF came up to investigate the same reports. Never checked back in. "We found their vehicles this morning." My blood went cold. "Where?" "About 2 miles from where you camped." Cars were still running, doors wide open, equipment scattered everywhere. Fresh tire tracks led right to the cliff edge, then just stopped. I drove to the scene immediately. 3 government sedans sat in a rough triangle. Engines cold now, but keys still in the ignition. The agents' radios were scattered on the ground, along with their investigation kits and cameras. It looked like they'd left in a hurry, but there were no signs of a struggle. The tire tracks were the strangest part. They led straight to the edge of a 200-foot drop, then disappeared. Not like someone had backed up or turned around. They just ended, like the vehicles had driven off the cliff. But there was nothing down below, except trees and rocks. "Makes no sense," said Agent Foster, who'd driven up from Louisville to investigate. 3 trained federal agents don't just vanish. And look at this. He handed me an evidence bag containing a piece of copper tubing. It was old, hand-soldered in a style I hadn't seen since the 1922. The metal was green with age, but it looked like it had been used recently. "Found this in Agent Murphy's car. Lab says it's copper alloy they stopped making in 1935. That afternoon, I took Agent Foster and two other federal investigators back up to Devil's Backbone. The snow had stopped, but the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Our breath came out in white puffs as we hiked along the ridge. "Tell me about the moonshine history up here," Foster said. "Devil's Backbone was crawling with illegal operations during Prohibition," I explained. Most famous was the Murphy family still. Federal agents raided them in 1927. Whole operation was hidden in a cave system somewhere around here. What happened? Gun battle. Cave collapsed, killed the entire Murphy family. Bodies were never recovered, and nobody ever found their still. Local folks say the government used too much dynamite, brought down half the mountain. Foster stopped walking. Murphy? Agent Murphy was the lead investigator on this case. We looked at each other. In 21 years of law enforcement, I'd learned that coincidences usually weren't. That's when we heard the voices. Men talking in the distance, coming from the direction of the cave system. We couldn't make out words, but the tone was angry, urgent. Foster motioned for us to move toward the sound. As we got closer to the caves, the voices got clearer. Old mountain dialect, words I hadn't heard since my grandfather's time. "Revenuers coming up the ridge," one voice said. "Best get the copper moved before they find the still." Foster drew his weapon. "Federal agents, show yourselves." The voices stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so complete it made my ears ring. We waited for 10 minutes, but nobody appeared. "Could be hiding in the caves," Foster said. We searched for 3 hours. The cave system was larger than I'd realized, with passages leading deep into the mountain. But we found no people, no equipment, no sign that anyone had been there recently. The strangest part was that the voices had been so clear, like the men were standing right next to us. As we headed back toward our vehicles, I noticed something that made me stop cold. Fresh footprints in a patch of snow, but they were strange. The impressions were deep, like someone wearing heavy boots. But when I knelt down to examine them closer, I could see through them to the ground below. "Foster, look at this." He crouched next to me. The footprints were there, clear as day, but they were translucent, like shadows pressed into the snow. "Equipment malfunction," he said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "Camera trick, maybe. But I'd seen enough footprints in my career to know when something was wrong. These weren't made by any living person." That night, I camped alone on the ridge again. Foster and his team had returned to town to file their reports, but I couldn't leave. 3 federal agents were missing, and I was the only one who seemed to understand that normal search procedures weren't going to work. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the truck engines again. This time I was ready. I grabbed my camera and crept toward the sound. Through the trees, I could see lights moving along the ridge, old-fashioned headlights that flickered like candle flames. I followed the lights to the cave entrance where I'd heard the voices earlier. The smell of corn mash was overwhelming now, and I could hear the sounds of a full moonshine operation. Water running through copper coils, wood crackling in a fire, men working and talking. But when I reached the cave entrance, everything went silent. The lights disappeared, the smells faded. My flashlight showed nothing but empty rock walls. Except for one thing. Carved deep into the stone near the entrance were the words, "Murphy, family still, federal boys keep out." The carving looked fresh, like someone had just finished it. But the style was old, done with hand tools. And below the warning, in smaller letters, "They killed us all, 1,927. I radioed for backup at first light, but the response I got made my stomach drop. "Ashford, we've got a problem. Found Agent Murphy and his team. They were discovered in a cave system 5 miles south of Devil's Backbone, unconscious and suffering from severe hypothermia. All 3 men were alive but unresponsive, like they'd been in a deep sleep for days. The strange part was that they were found in a cave that had been searched twice already. They keep mumbling about Murphy's Ridge," the paramedic told me. "But there's no Murphy's Ridge on any of our maps." I knew better. Dr. Sarah Whitman, the local historian, had shown me survey maps from the 1922nd. Back then, Devil's Backbone had been called Murphy's Ridge, named after the family that had controlled the moonshine trade in these mountains. While the federal agents were being treated at the hospital, I convinced Dr. Whitman to come up to the ridge with me. She was in her 60s, a retired college professor who'd spent 30 years studying Appalachian history. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it was her. The Murphy family were good people, she explained as we hiked toward the caves. They weren't criminals in the way we think of it today. Making moonshine was a way of life in these mountains, part of the culture that went back generations. But they fought federal agents. They defended their home. The government raid in 1927 was brutal, William. Agents came up here with enough dynamite to level a building. They didn't just want to arrest the Murphys, they wanted to make an example. We reached the cave entrance where I'd found the carved warning. Dr. Whitman examined the stone carefully, running her fingers over the letters. "This carving is authentic," she said. "The tool marks, the style, this was done in the 1920 seconds. But look here." She pointed to something I'd missed the night before. Below the family name was carved an oath. "We swear by blood and honor to protect this mountain from all government men." Sarah, those agents found 19th century copper tubing in their car. I've been hearing voices, seeing impossible footprints. Something's protecting this mountain, and I don't think it's anything living. She was quiet for a long time, staring into the cave entrance. "There are stories," she finally said. "Local people always claim the Murphy family never really left these mountains, that they're still here, still protecting their territory." That's when we heard it, the sound of a hammer striking metal, echoing from deep in the cave system. Steady, rhythmic strikes, like someone repairing copper equipment. "Is someone down there?" Dr. Whitman whispered. I drew my flashlight and service weapon. "Federal agents, identify yourselves." The hammering stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then a voice called back from the darkness, speaking in mountain dialect so thick I could barely understand it. "Ain't no federal boys welcome on Murphy land. Y'all best turn around while you still can." I could feel Dr. Whitman trembling beside me. The voice had come from deep in the cave, but it sounded like someone standing right next to us. "This is Ranger Ashford with the National Forest Service. We need to talk." Laughter echoed from the cave. Cold, bitter laughter that made my skin crawl. "Ashford, you the one been snooping around our operation, finding our gifts?" "The mason jars. Somehow, they knew about the moonshine I'd found outside my tent. We don't want any trouble," I called back. "We're just looking for 3 missing federal agents." "Oh, we know about them federal boys," the voice said. "They're learning what happens to government, men who come hunting the Murphy family." More voices joined in, at least 4 or 5 men talking at once. But their words overlapped in impossible ways, like they were speaking from different time periods. I heard references to the big raid and dynamite and revenge. Dr. Whitman grabbed my arm. "William, we need to leave. Now." But before we could back away from the cave entrance, the temperature around us dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Our breath turned to white clouds, and frost began forming on the rocks. The smell of corn mash became so strong it burned my nose. And then I saw them. 3 figures emerged from the darkness of the cave. They looked like men wearing 1920 seconds clothing, overalls, suspenders, wool caps, but they were translucent, glowing with a faint blue light. I could see the cave wall through their bodies. The leader stepped forward. He was a tall, thin man with a gray beard and eyes that burned like coals. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I'm Ezra Murphy," he said. "This here's my mountain, my operation, my family's honor you've been trampling on. Them federal boys you're looking for? They're safe. 2 for now. But you, government men need to learn some respect." I tried to speak, but no words came. My service weapon felt useless in my hand. These weren't men I could arrest or intimidate. They were something else entirely. "We died protecting our livelihood from government thieves," Ezra Murphy continued. "Died defending our right to live free in these mountains. That oath we carved in stone? It ain't just words. We're bound to this place until every federal agent learns to stay away." Dr. Whitman found her voice first. "Mr. Murphy, Prohibition ended in 1933. The federal laws that destroyed your family, they're gone now." The ghost laughed. "Laws change, but government men stay the same. Always coming to these mountains to take what ain't theirs, to destroy what they don't understand. The other figures began moving closer. I could see their faces now, pale and angry, eyes filled with decades of rage. One was just a boy, maybe 16 years old. Another was an old woman in a long dress. "Your family," I managed to say. "They all died in the cave-in?" "5 generations of Murphys," Ezra said. "From great-granddaddy to little Tommy there. All killed because federal boys couldn't leave mountain folk alone." The temperature kept dropping. Ice was forming on my radio and camera equipment. Dr. Whitman was shaking uncontrollably. "What do you want?" I asked. Ezra Murphy smiled, showing teeth that glowed like moonlight. "Same thing we wanted in 1927, to be left alone. To protect our operation. To make sure no more government men come hunting what's ours." The boy ghost spoke for the first time. "Uncle Ezra, these ones smell different. Not like them federal boys we caught." "Maybe," Ezra said, "but they're still government, still carrying badges and guns into our territory." Behind me, I heard Dr. Whitman whispering what sounded like a prayer. The ghost family was forming a circle around us, cutting off any escape route. "Them 3 federal boys," Ezra continued. "They're sleeping safe in the deep cave. But they won't wake up until every government man learns to respect the Murphy name. You can join them, or you can spread the word. Devil's backbone belongs to the dead." The ghost of Ezra Murphy raised his hand, and suddenly I could see everything. The entire cave system lit up with blue fire, revealing a massive moonshine operation that had been hidden for 60 years. Copper stills gleamed like new. Wood fires burned without smoke, and clear liquid flowed through coils that existed in some place between the living world and whatever realm the Murphy family now inhabited. "This is what them federal boys destroyed," Ezra said. 5 generations of work, of tradition, of knowledge passed, down from father to son, all blown to pieces with government dynamite. Dr. Whitman stepped closer to me, her voice barely a whisper. "William, the missing agents, they're here somewhere." I could see them now, suspended in the blue light at the back of the cave. 3 men floating like they were underwater, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. They looked peaceful, but I knew they were trapped between life and death, caught in the Murphy family's web of revenge. "Let them go," I said to Ezra. "They didn't destroy your family. That was 60 years ago." The old ghost's eyes flared brighter. "Time don't mean nothing to the dead government man. Every federal agent who comes to these mountains carries the blood of my family. Every badge is a reminder of what you people took from us." The boy ghost, little Tommy Murphy, floated closer to me. "You're different," he said. "You smell like sorrow, like loss. What did the government take from you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "My wife and daughter, killed by a drunk driver while I was away on a federal training course. The guilt I'd carried for 21 years. The anger I'd directed at every moonshiner I'd arrested. My family," I said quietly. "I lost my family too." Ezra Murphy studied me with those burning eyes. "Government family, government loss, ain't the same thing." "Loss is loss, Doctor," Whitman said suddenly. "Mr. Murphy, I've studied your family's history. I know what happened in 1927 wasn't just about illegal liquor. It was about a way of life, about mountain people being treated like criminals for doing what their grandfathers had done." The ghost family grew quiet. The blue light dimmed slightly. "You know our story?" the old woman asked. She had to be Ezra's wife, her face lined with worry even in death. "I know the federal agents who raided your operation were under orders to use extreme force. Doctor," Whitman continued, "I know they set off explosives, without checking if anyone was in the cave. I know your family died because Washington wanted to make an example of mountain moonshiners." "Sarah," I whispered, "what are you doing?" "What should have been done 60 years ago," she said, acknowledging the truth. Ezra Murphy's expression began to change. The burning anger in his eyes cooled slightly. "You saying the government admits they done wrong?" "I'm saying I do," I replied, holstering my weapon. "What happened to your family was wrong. You weren't criminals. You were people trying to live free in your own mountains." The ghost of little Tommy Murphy floated up to me. "You really believe that, Mr. Government Man?" I thought about my wife and daughter, about the drunk driver who destroyed my life with illegal alcohol, about all the moonshine operations I'd busted with military precision, never thinking about the families I was destroying. Yes, I said, I believe it. That's when Ezra Murphy did something I didn't expect. He began to fade, becoming more translucent, and I could see tears of light running down his ghostly cheeks. 60 years, he said. 60 years we've been waiting for just one government man to admit the truth. The blue fire began to dim throughout the cave. The massive still operation started to flicker like it was losing power. But our oath, the old woman said. We swore to protect this mountain. Mama, Tommy Murphy said, maybe protecting means something different now. I could feel the temperature starting to warm. The ice on my equipment began to melt. Mr. Murphy, I said, your family's honor doesn't need protecting anymore. People remember you as mountain folk who stood up for their rights, not as criminals. Dr. Whitman has spent 30 years making sure your story gets told right. Ezra looked at the sleeping federal agents, then back at me. If I let them boys go, how do I know more won't come? How do I know the government won't try to erase us again? I thought about that for a long moment. Then I did something that could have ended my career. I took off my Federal Ranger badge and laid it on the stone floor of the cave. Because I'll make sure this place stays protected, I said, not from the government, but by the government. As a historical site, a memorial to your family. The ghost family gathered together, speaking in whispers too low for me to hear. Finally, Ezra Murphy nodded. All right, government man. You keep your word, we'll keep ours. But this mountain stays Murphy territory. Any federal boys come up here without respect, without understanding what happened, they'll answer to us. The blue light began to fade rapidly. The ghostly still operation dissolved like mist. The 3 sleeping agents slowly descended to the cave floor, their eyes beginning to flutter open. Wait, I called out as the Murphy family started to disappear. Will I see you again? Ezra Murphy's. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. You'll know we're watching, Ranger Ashford. And if you ever need mountain justice, just leave some good moonshine by the cave entrance. We'll know you remember. The last thing I saw was little Tommy Murphy waving goodbye before the blue light went out completely. The 3 federal agents woke up with no memory of the past 3 days. They remembered driving up to Devil's Backbone, remembered getting out of their vehicles to investigate, and then nothing until they found themselves lying on the cave floor with me and Dr. Whitman standing over them. The official report listed it as a case of severe hypothermia causing temporary amnesia. The agents had apparently taken shelter in the cave during the snowstorm and lost consciousness. Their equipment malfunction was blamed on the extreme cold. But I knew better, and so did Dr. Whitman. 6 months later, I submitted a proposal to have the Devil's Backbone cave system designated as a protected historical site. I included Dr. Whitman's research about the Murphy family and the federal raid that destroyed them. The proposal was approved, and now there's a small memorial plaque at the entrance to the caves that reads, "In memory of the Murphy family, who lived and died defending their mountain home." I never told anyone about the ghosts. Who would believe me? But I kept my promise to Ezra Murphy. I made sure the cave system stayed protected, and I made sure any federal agents who came to the area understood they were walking on sacred ground. I also started leaving a jar of good moonshine by the cave entrance every month on the anniversary of the 1927 raid. It's always gone by morning, though I never see who takes it. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm patrolling the ridge, I hear the sound of an old truck engine puttering along the mountain roads. I'll catch a whiff of corn mash on the wind, or see a flicker of blue light deep in the caves. It doesn't scare me anymore. It reminds me that some things are worth protecting, even after death. Dr. Whitman published a book about the Murphy family 3 years later. It became required reading at the State Police Academy, helping a new generation of law enforcement officers understand the complex history between mountain people and federal authority. As for me, I served another 12 years in these mountains before I retired. I never lost another federal agent, and I never found another illegal still on Devil's Backbone. Word spread among the local moonshiners that the ridge was haunted, and they moved their operations to other mountains. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the Murphy family found a way to protect their mountain without violence, by teaching people like me that respect goes both ways. I still live in the area, in a cabin about 5 miles from Devil's Backbone. Sometimes I hike up to the memorial plaque and sit for a while, thinking about families and honor and the 504 different ways people can serve justice. If you're ever in this part of Kentucky and you smell corn mash cooking in the wind, don't go looking for it. Show some respect for mountain traditions, leave the mountain folk alone, and whatever you do, don't drink any moonshine you might find sitting around. The Murphy family keeps their word, but they expect others to keep theirs too. And trust me, you don't want to learn what happens to people who break promises to the dead. Some nights, when the moon is dark and the wind is howling through the ridge, I can still hear Ezra Murphy's voice echoing through the mountains. This here's Murphy territory, and Murphys take care of their own. And after 21 years of wondering what that means, I finally understand. It means some things are more important than badges and laws and government authority. It means family and honor and respect for the people who came before us. It means the dead are watching and they remember everything. My name is David Mountainheart, and I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 12 years now. People always ask about my last name. It's Cherokee, meaning guardian of high places. My grandmother gave it to our family when we moved back to North Carolina in the 1950 seconds. She said, "The mountains called us home." I work the Grandfather Mountain section, mostly doing high-altitude rescues and rock climbing safety. It's dangerous work, but I love these peaks. Been climbing since I was 8 years old, started with my uncle on the easier trails. Now I can scale faces that would make most people dizzy just looking up at them. The other rangers tease me because I'm working on a project about Cherokee mountain stories. My grandmother told me dozens of them before she passed, and I'm trying to write them down before they're lost forever. Most are about respecting the mountains, staying on safe paths, listening to nature's warnings. One story she told me over and over was about the screaming spirit of Grandfather Mountain. She said, there was a Cherokee warrior who got trapped in a tunnel on the north face during a terrible winter storm. He died calling for help, and his spirit still screams to warn people away from danger, or sometimes to challenge worthy climbers to prove themselves. I never believed it, thought it was just an old way of keeping people away from the dangerous climbing areas. The North Face has claimed 6 lives in the past 20 years. Those screams people report just wind through the rock formations. The impossible echoes hikers talk about? Simple acoustics. But I was wrong. It started on January 15th, 1993. An ice storm had been battering the mountains for 3 days. Most of the parkway was closed, and we'd warned all the climbing groups to stay away until conditions improved. The North Face was completely covered in ice. Beautiful but deadly. I was doing a routine check of the ranger station equipment when the call came in. A climbing team of 4 college students from Appalachian State had missed their check-in time. Their emergency contact said they'd planned to attempt the North Face tunnel route. The tunnel route, I felt my stomach drop. It's a natural formation about 2/3 of the way up the North Face, a narrow passage that cuts through solid rock for about 50 feet. Experienced climbers use it as shelter and a rest point, but it's technical climbing just to reach it. In ice conditions like these, it was suicide. I have to go up there, I told my supervisor, Jim Morrison, over the radio. Dave, it's too dangerous. We'll wait for the weather to break. If they're hurt and stuck in those conditions, they won't last through the night. Temperatures dropping to 15 below. Jim was quiet for a long moment. Take the emergency gear. Report every 30 minutes. And be careful up there. I've got a bad feeling about this one. I loaded my pack with everything I might need. Ropes, ice axes, first aid supplies, emergency shelter, flares. The drive up the access road took 40 minutes through ice and snow. I had to put chains on my truck twice. When I reached the base of the North Face, the silence was wrong. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. No wind, no bird sounds, no small animals moving in the brush. Even my footsteps seemed muffled. The climbing route started behind a stand of old-growth hemlocks. I'd been up this way hundreds of times. But today, something felt different. The trees looked darker somehow, and ice hung from the branches in strange, twisted shapes. My breath fogged in white clouds that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should. I checked my radio. Static. That was odd. I usually had good signal until I got higher up the face. Looking up the route, I could see the dark opening of the tunnel about 800 feet above me. No signs of the missing climbers, but they could be anywhere along the various ledge systems. I clipped into my safety rope and started climbing. The first 200 feet went normally. Good handholds, secure ice placements for my axes. My breath came in steady puffs, and my muscles warmed up nicely. This was what I lived for, the perfect balance between human skill and nature's challenges. But as I climbed higher, that wrongness I'd felt at the base got stronger. The ice formations became increasingly bizarre, spirals and curves that didn't match how ice normally forms on rock. Some of the icicles pointed upward instead of hanging down. At 400 feet, I found the first sign of the missing climbers. A single glove, bright blue, wedged into a crack in the rock. But it was positioned strangely, not dropped or lost, but placed deliberately, like someone had put it there as a marker. I pulled out my radio. Still just static. That's when I heard the first scream. It came from above, echoing down the rock face with impossible clarity. Not a shout for help or a cry of pain, something wilder. Longer. It seemed to bounce off every surface, coming from the tunnel opening and somehow from the rocks all around me at the same time. My blood went cold, but I forced myself to think rationally. Sound travels strangely in mountain formations. The missing climbers could be hurt, maybe hypothermic and disoriented. I had to keep going. I climbed faster now, my ice axes biting into the frozen rock with sharp, metallic sounds. Every few minutes, another scream would echo down, sometimes clear, sometimes fading like it was traveling through miles of stone. At 600 feet, I found something that made no sense. Footprints in a patch of snow on a narrow ledge. But they weren't boot prints for modern climbing shoes. They were bare feet, human feet but larger than normal, with deep impressions, like whoever made them was carrying enormous weight. The prints led along the ledge toward the tunnel, opening, then simply stopped at the edge of a sheer drop. I looked down, nothing but 600 feet of empty air to the trees below. Another scream, longer this time, seemed to come from inside the mountain itself. I stared at those impossible footprints for a long time, trying to make sense of them. Maybe someone had climbed barefoot for some crazy reason. I'd heard of extreme climbers doing stranger things. Maybe the ice had melted and refrozen, distorting normal boot prints. But even as I told myself these explanations, I knew they were wrong. The prints were too fresh, too clear, and they led to nowhere. I kept climbing. The tunnel opening grew larger above me, a dark mouth in the gray rock face. As I got closer, I could see that ice had formed in strange patterns around it. Not the usual random coating, but almost like decorative designs. Spirals and angular shapes that looked almost like symbols. At 700 feet, I reached the ledge that led to the tunnel entrance. This was where experienced climbers usually rested before attempting the final technical pitch to the summit. The ledge was about 8 feet wide and 20 feet long, plenty of room for a climbing team to set up camp. But there was no sign of the missing students. Instead, I found their gear. 4 backpacks sat in a perfect line against the rock wall, about 3 feet apart. Not dropped or scattered like you'd expect from climbers in distress, but placed with careful precision. Each pack was unzipped, contents arranged in neat displays on the snow-covered ledge, climbing ropes coiled in identical spirals. 4 headlamps arranged in a square pattern, all pointing toward the tunnel entrance. Food containers opened and emptied, but the food was gone, not eaten, just gone. Most disturbing were the sleeping bags. All 4 were laid out flat, zippers open, but they were covered in a thin layer of ice, like they'd been there for days, not hours. But the students had only been missing since this morning. I called out, "Hello, Appalachian State Climbing Team. Can you hear me?" My voice echoed off the rocks normally at first, then seemed to stretch and distort as it traveled toward the tunnel. By the time the echo came back, it almost sounded like someone else's voice answering me. I approached the tunnel entrance carefully. It was about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, cutting straight into solid rock. The Cherokee stories said it went all the way through the mountain, but I'd never explored it fully. Most climbers just used the first 20 feet for shelter. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The strange ice formations around the entrance weren't random. They were definitely symbols, angular, geometric patterns that looked like no Cherokee writing I'd ever seen, but somehow felt familiar anyway. They covered the rock in spiraling designs that seemed to pull your eyes toward the dark opening. And from inside the tunnel came a sound like wind, but rhythmic, like breathing. I clicked on my headlamp and peered inside. The tunnel stretched back farther than my light could reach, the walls smooth and black. About 10 feet in, I could see something pale on the ground. Another glove, this one white, positioned in the exact center of the tunnel. "Hello," I called again. "If anyone's in there, I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." The breathing sound stopped. For about 10 seconds, there was perfect silence. Then, from deep inside the tunnel, came a scream that made every muscle in my body lock up. It wasn't human. Couldn't be human. Too long, too loud, too full of rage, sorrow. It seemed to come from multiple directions at once, bouncing off the tunnel walls, but also somehow coming from underneath me, from the mountain itself. When it finally ended, my ears were ringing. I forced my legs to move and stepped into the tunnel, following my headlamp beam toward the white glove. The air inside was warmer than outside, but it felt thick, like trying to breathe soup. Each step echoed strangely, taking too long to fade. I reached the glove and knelt down to examine it. Same brand as the blue one I'd found below, but this one was torn. 3 parallel gashes cut through the waterproof fabric, too clean to be from rock or ice, like claw marks. Standing up, I aimed my light deeper into the tunnel. About 20 feet ahead, I could see the passage curve to the left. And just at the edge of my light, something moved. A shadow, human-shaped but too tall, sliding along the wall. "Who's there?" I shouted. The shadow stopped. Then it turned toward me. And for just a second, I saw eyes reflecting my headlamp beam. Not the red reflection you get from animals, but white. Bright white, like stars. The scream came again, so loud this time that my headlamp flickered. The sound filled the tunnel, filled my head, seemed to vibrate. In my bones. I stumbled backward, catching myself against the smooth wall. When the scream ended and my light steadied, the tunnel was empty. But carved into the wall where the shadow had been standing were fresh symbols, the same angular patterns I'd seen outside, but these were cut deep into solid rock, and they were warm to the touch. I ran. Not proud of it, but I ran out of that tunnel as fast as I could move. My training, my experience, my Cherokee pride, Salmony, none of it mattered. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out, get away, get down the mountain immediately. I reached my rope and started rappelling without even checking my gear properly. Lucky I didn't fall. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the descent. Halfway down, I heard something that stopped my blood cold. Voices calling from above. 4 voices, young and scared, shouting for help. The missing students, they were in the tunnel. I hung there on my rope, 400 feet up a frozen cliff face, listening to 4 college kids screaming for help from inside a tunnel that I knew was occupied by something that wasn't human. Every rational part of my brain was telling me to rappel to the bottom, get to my truck, and call for backup. But those voices were real. Terrified. And as a ranger, I couldn't abandon people in need. I started climbing back up. The voices got clearer as I ascended. 2 males, 2 females, all panicked. They were calling specific names. "Sarah, Mike, get us out of here. Something's wrong with the tunnel." By the time I reached the ledge again, my muscles were burning and my breathing was ragged. The voices had stopped, but I could see flickering light coming from inside the tunnel. Flashlights or headlamps moving around erratically. "This is Park Ranger Mountain Heart," I called toward the tunnel entrance. "I'm here to help. Are any of you injured?" A female voice answered immediately. "Oh, thank God. We can't find our way out. The tunnel keeps changing." That didn't make sense, but people got disoriented in stressful situations. "I'm coming in. Keep talking so I can find you." I checked my gear one more time and entered the tunnel. My headlamp beam showed the same smooth walls, the same fresh symbols carved into the rock. But now there were footprints in the thin layer of dust on the ground, whose still normal boot prints from modern hiking shoes. "Where are you?" I called. "We're here," a male voice, echoing from somewhere ahead. "We can see your light, but we can't reach you. Every time we try to walk toward the entrance, we end up going deeper." I followed the curve in the tunnel, moving carefully. The air was getting thicker, and my light seemed dimmer somehow, like the darkness was actively fighting against it. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. My light revealed a circular room with 3 other passages leading off in different directions. Definitely not the simple straight-through tunnel described in the climbing guides. But there was no sign of the students. "Where are you?" I called again. "Right here." The female voice was coming from the passage on my left, very close. "We can hear you. You sound like you're right next to us." I moved toward the left passage, but as I did, the voices started coming from behind me. I spun around, and now they seemed to be coming from the passage on the right. "This is impossible," I muttered. "What's impossible?" The male voice was directly above me now. I aimed my headlamp at the ceiling. Solid rock, no openings. But somehow the voice was coming from up there. That's when I understood. The students weren't lost in the tunnel. They were dead. The realization hit me like ice water. Those voices weren't calling for help. They were bait. Just like the gear arranged on the ledge, the gloves placed as markers. Something was using their voices to draw me deeper into the mountain. I started backing toward the entrance, but the chamber had changed. Where there had been one passage leading back, now there were 3 identical openings. Each one looked exactly like the way I'd come in. "Ranger," the female voice was pleading now. "Please don't leave us. We're so scared." "I'm not leaving," I said quietly, trying to figure out which passage was real. "But I need you to tell me something only you would know." "What's your name?" Silence. "Then, what kind of question is that? You know our names." But I didn't. I'd never gotten their names from the emergency contact. "Tell me anyway," I said, moving slowly toward the middle passage. More silence. Then, in a voice that was definitely male, but somehow spoke with the female voice's words, "My name is Sarah. We're all Sarah here." The wrongness of it made my skin crawl. I started running toward the middle passage, but after 10 steps, I was back in the circular chamber. I tried the left passage, I desinoti, same result. The right passage led me right back where I started. The voices began laughing. Not human laughter. Too long, too many voices at once, coming from every direction. The sound filled the chamber, bounced off the walls, seemed to come from inside my own head. And then I saw it. Standing in the passage I'd originally entered through was a figure in traditional Cherokee clothing. Leather leggings, bone breastplate, feathers and long black hair. But it was wrong in every way something could be wrong. Too tall, at least 7 feet. Arms too long, hanging almost to its knees. Face partially transparent, showing the rock wall behind it. And the eyes were exactly what I'd glimpsed before. White stars burning in dark sockets. It opened its mouth and screamed. The sound was physically painful, like ice picks driven into my ears. My headlamp shattered, plunging the chamber into complete darkness. I fell to my knees, hands pressed to my head, feeling warm blood trickling from my ears. But in that darkness, I could see the creature perfectly. It was glowing with its own pale light, and as I watched, it began to change. The Cherokee clothing melted away, replaced by modern climbing gear. The face shifted, becoming younger, more familiar. It was wearing the same jacket as one of the missing students, the same boots I'd seen tracks from. It had taken their forms, their voices, maybe their souls. "David Mountainheart," it said, and its voice was like wind through stone. "Guardian of high places, you have come to the sacred tunnel." I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. "What do you want?" "The same thing I have always wanted, to find a worthy challenger, to test the strength of those who dare climb the sacred mountain. I just came to rescue some kids." The creature laughed, and its face shifted again. Now it looked like my grandmother, but with those terrible burning eyes. "There are no children to rescue, grandson. There are only those who prove themselves worthy, and those who become part of the mountain forever." It gestured to the walls around us, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They were covered in symbols, but not just carved into the rock. The symbols were made of human shapes, the climbers who had been absorbed into the stone, their bodies forming the angular patterns I'd seen. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all the missing climbers over the decades, all the unexplained accidents. "Your choice, Guardian," the creature said. "Prove you belong among the sacred peaks, or join your ancestors in the walls of the tunnel. It raised one impossibly long arm, and I saw that its fingers ended in claws of black stone. How? I managed to ask. Reach the heart of the mountain, find the original tunnel where the first warrior fell. Do this without losing yourself to fear, and I will let you return to the world above. Fail. It gestured. Again at the walls of trapped climbers. Behind it, 3 passages opened, different from before, leading deeper into the mountain. I could feel cold air flowing from them, smell something like incense and old bones. Choose, it said. I looked at those 3 dark passages and understood that everything I thought I knew about Grandfather Mountain was wrong. This wasn't just a climbing accident or a search and rescue gone bad. I was standing in the presence of something that had been here for centuries, something my grandmother's stories had tried to warn me about. But the stories also said the screaming spirit could be faced with honor. You're the warrior from the old tales, I said. The one who got trapped in the tunnel. The creature's burning eyes flickered. I am the guardian of the sacred heights. I test those who would climb the bones of the ancestors. My grandmother told me the story wrong, didn't she? You weren't trapped by accident. You chose to. Stay. For the first time, the creature looked almost surprised. Your grandmother was Old Woman Mountain Heart. She knew the true stories. She said, you were here to protect the mountain from those who didn't respect it, but also to challenge the worthy. I forced myself to stand, even though my legs were still shaking. The missing students, they weren't climbers. They were just kids on a dare. They came seeking thrills. They showed no respect, no understanding. They became part of the mountain's strength. I thought about the perfectly arranged gear, the careful placement of the gloves, but you made it look like a climbing accident, because you don't want just anyone to find you. Only those who truly know the mountains may face the trial. The 3 passages gaped before me, each one breathing out cold air that smelled of stone and time. I realized this was a test not just of courage, but of knowledge. Cherokee knowledge that had been passed down through my family for generations. Grandmother told me about the 3 paths, I said slowly, remembering old stories told by firelight. The path of the bear leads to strength but no wisdom. The path of the eagle leads to sight but no understanding. The path of the turtle leads to the heart of the mountain. The creature nodded slowly. Choose. The left passage was wide and sloped downward. I could feel warm air coming from it, and something about it felt easy, inviting. That would be the bear's path, the easy choice that led to destruction. The right passage was narrow and sloped upward. Cold air flowed from it, and I could smell snow and sky. The eagle's path, S19, it would probably lead to high chambers with spectacular views, but no real answers. The middle passage was the smallest, barely wide enough for one person. The air from it was neither warm nor cold, and it smelled like sage and cedar smoke. The turtle's path, slow, careful, connected to the earth. I started toward the middle passage. Wait, the creature said. I turned back. It was changing again, the Cherokee clothing returning, but now it looked more real, more human. You understand the mountain's law, but understanding alone is not enough. You must face what lies in the heart of the sacred tunnel. What's there? Truth. The truth about why I remain, the truth about what the mountain demands, and the truth about whether you are truly worthy to be called guardian of high places. I nodded and entered the middle passage. The tunnel was barely 4 feet wide, forcing me to walk carefully. Without my headlamp, I had to feel my way along the smooth walls. But somehow I could see. The stone itself seemed to glow with faint light, just enough to show the way forward. The passage sloped gently downward and curved to the right. As I walked, I began to hear something ahead. Not the creature's screams, but singing. Soft Cherokee songs that I recognized from my marquee. Childhood, songs my grandmother had hummed while working in her garden. After what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes, the passage opened into the largest chamber yet. This one was perfectly circular, about 30 feet across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The walls were covered in Cherokee symbols, IYC, not the harsh angular carvings I'd seen before, but beautiful, flowing designs that looked painted with light. In the center of the chamber sat a figure. It was an old Cherokee man, wearing traditional clothing that looked ancient but somehow perfectly preserved. His hair was white and long, his face lined with age, but his eyes bright and alert. He was sitting cross-legged next to a small fire that burned without fuel, singing softly. When he saw me, he smiled. "Welcome, David Mountainheart. I have been waiting for you. You're the warrior, the real one." He nodded. "I was called Many Eagles. I came to this sacred place to fast and seek visions, as young warriors did in the old days. But something happened that was not supposed to happen. You died here." "No, I chose to remain. I saw in my vision what was coming, the white settlers, the taking of our lands, the destruction of the sacred places. Someone needed to stay and guard this mountain to ensure that only those who understood its true nature could reach the highest peaks." I sat down across from him. The fire was warm on my face, and for the first time since entering the tunnel, I felt safe. But the creature upstairs is my shadow, my anger and pain, given form by years of watching unworthy climbers treat this sacred place like a playground. I cannot control it anymore. It has grown too strong, too hungry. The missing students, the other climbers over the years. Many Eagles nodded sadly. My shadow feeds on their life force, their connection to the mountain. Each death makes it stronger and makes me weaker. I can no longer call it back. How do I stop it? The old warrior looked at me with ancient eyes. There is only one way. Someone must take my place as guardian. Someone must accept the responsibility willingly, with full understanding of what it means. I understood. I'd have to stay here. Forever. Not forever. Until another worthy guardian comes to relieve you. But it could be years, decades. And you would change, as I have changed. The mountain would become part of you, and you part of it. I thought about my life outside. My job, my friends, my research project about Cherokee stories. All of it seemed suddenly small compared to what was being asked of me. What if I refuse? My shadow will continue to grow. Eventually, it will be strong enough to leave the tunnel, to hunt across the entire mountain. Every climber, every hiker, every person who comes to these peaks will be in danger. The singing started again, not from Many Eagles, but from the walls themselves. Voices of all the Cherokee warriors who had guarded sacred places, all the spirits who watched over the mountains. And somehow, I could hear my grandmother's voice among them. "Choose quickly, grandson," Many Eagles said. "My shadow knows you are here. It will come soon, and if you have not decided." The chamber shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. From somewhere above came a scream of pure rage. The screaming got closer, echoing down through stone like something huge was tearing its way through solid rock to reach us. Many Eagles stood up slowly, his ancient bones creaking. "It knows what I'm offering you," he said. "It will try to stop the transfer." I stood too, my mind racing. There has to be another way. Perhaps, but can you think of one before it arrives? The chamber shook again, more violently. Cracks appeared in the walls, and the beautiful Cherokee symbols flickered like candle flames in wind. That's when I remembered something else my grandmother had told me. Not about the screaming spirit, but about Cherokee traditions in general. "What if it's not about replacing you?" I said quickly. "What if it's about healing the split between you and your shadow?" Many Eagles stared at me. "What do you mean?" "You said the shadow is your anger and pain. But in Cherokee tradition, anger and pain aren't things to be destroyed, they're things to be balanced. What if instead of one of us becoming guardian, we help you become whole again?" Another scream, so close, it made my teeth ache. "How would that even work?" Many Eagles asked. I was making it up as I went, drawing on fragments of stories and ceremonies my grandmother had described. You acknowledge the shadow as part of yourself. You accept the anger, but you also remember why you chose to stay. Not just to punish the unworthy, but to protect what you love. And then you choose to leave. Both parts of you, together. You've done your job for... The mountain doesn't need a guardian anymore. It needs people who respect it by choice, not fear. The ceiling cracked, and pieces of stone fell around us. Through the largest crack, I could see burning white eyes staring down. "It's too late," Many Eagles whispered. "No." I stepped into the center of the chamber, directly under the crack. "Come down here," I shouted upward. "Face us both." The response was immediate. The ceiling exploded inward, and the shadow creature dropped into the chamber in a shower of stone and dust. Up close, it was even more terrifying, 9 feet tall now, its claws dripping with something that glowed like liquid starlight. But I noticed something important. When it looked at many eagles, its burning eyes flickered with something that wasn't just rage, sadness, longing. "You want to be whole again too," I said to the creature. "You're tired of being just the angry part." It snarled, but didn't immediately attack. "Tell him," I said to many eagles. "Tell your shadow why you really stayed." The old warrior was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to speak in Cherokee. I couldn't understand all the words, but the tone was gentle, loving. He was talking about the mountain, about the beauty of sunrise over the peaks, about the sound wind makes through the high pines. As he spoke, the creature began to change. It grew smaller, less monstrous, the burning eyes dimmed to a more natural light. I stayed to protect what I loved. Many eagles continued in English. But somewhere along the way, I forgot about love and remembered only fear. Forgot about protection and remembered only punishment. He walked over to the creature and, incredibly, embraced it. Light exploded through the chamber. Not harsh or blinding, but warm like spring sunshine. When it faded, there was only one figure. Many eagles, but younger looking, more solid, more real. "Thank you," he said to me. I had forgotten that healing was possible. The chamber around us was changing too. The cracks were sealing, but instead of returning to stone, the walls were becoming transparent. I could see through them to other chambers, other tunnels, an entire network of caves and passages through the heart of Grandfather Mountain. "Is it over?" I asked. "My part is." Many eagles smiled, and he looked like any normal person now, not a spirit or shadow. "I can leave this place knowing it will be protected by people who choose to respect it, not by fear of supernatural punishment." "What about the missing students?" He gestured to one of the transparent walls. Through it, I could see 4 young people sitting around a campfire, laughing and talking. They looked confused but unharmed. They're in a pocket of time I created to protect them from my shadow. When we leave this chamber, they'll find themselves back at their base camp with no memory of the tunnel. They'll think they got lost in a storm and found shelter. And the other climbers, the ones who died over the years? Many eagles' face grew sad. They are truly gone. My shadow's hunger was real, but they will not be forgotten. He touched the wall, and for a moment I could see faces in the stone. Dozens of climbers, looking peaceful now. Their courage in facing the mountain, even if they were unprepared, has become part of its strength. We walked back through the tunnel together, but it was different now. Shorter, simpler, just a natural passage through rock. When we emerged onto the ledge, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "The students' gear," I said, pointing to the neatly arranged equipment, "will be gone when you return tomorrow. They'll wake up at base camp thinking they packed everything themselves." Many eagles looked out over the view, hundreds of miles of Blue Ridge Mountains stretching to the horizon. "It's beautiful," he said, quietly. "I had forgotten how beautiful it is when you're not always watching for threats. What will you do now?" "What any Cherokee warrior does when his duty is complete. Go home to my people." He smiled. "There are others like me, spirits who have been guarding sacred places for too long. Perhaps I can help them remember balance too." He started to fade, becoming transparent like mountain mist. "Wait," I said. "Will I see you again? Every time you climb these peaks with respect and love instead of conquest and ego. Every time you help someone understand that the mountains are sacred, not just scenic. Every time you remember that being a guardian means protecting, not punishing." The last thing I saw of him was his smile. I rappelled down the mountain in the growing darkness, using my backup flashlight. By the time I reached my truck, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees and snow was beginning to fall. The next morning, I led a full search and rescue team to find the missing students. We discovered them at their base camp, 6 miles from the north face, sitting around a campfire and looking confused. They claimed they'd gotten lost in the storm and spent the night in a natural shelter, but couldn't remember exactly where. Their gear was all accounted for. No one was injured. Case closed. I never reported what really happened in the tunnel. Who would believe it? But I did finish my grandmother's project. I wrote down every Cherokee Mountain story she'd ever told me, and I added a new one about the importance of balance, about spirits who guard sacred places not through fear but through love, and about the difference between being a guardian and being a prison warden. Sometimes, when I'm climbing alone in the early morning, I hear singing echoing through the peaks. Not screams of rage or warnings of danger, but songs of celebration. The mountain itself singing about the beauty of sunrise, the joy of wind. Through stone, the eternal dance between earth and sky. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see other figures on distant peaks. Climbers who move with impossible grace, who seem to glow with their own light. I think they're other guardians. Spirits who have learned to protect through love instead of fear, who watch over sacred places, not as prisons, but as homes. I'm still a park ranger, still do high-altitude rescue work. But now when I meet climbers who seem disrespectful or unprepared, I don't lecture them about safety regulations. I tell them stories instead. Stories about why the mountains are sacred. Stories about the Cherokee warriors who loved these peaks so much they chose to stay and protect them. Stories about balance and respect and the difference between conquering a mountain and becoming worthy of it. Most listen, some even understand. And I've never seen the screaming spirit again, but I still hear the mountain singing. And I know that somewhere among these ancient peaks, spirits are keeping watch. It's not as angry guardians anymore, but as loving teachers, helping people learn to climb not just with their hands and feet, but with their hearts. The tunnel is still there, on the north face of Grandfather Mountain. But now it's just a tunnel, a natural shelter for climbers who treat the mountain with respect, a passage through stone for those who understand that some places are sacred. The screaming has stopped, but the mountain still speaks, for those who know how to listen. My name is Robert Thornton, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 19 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these ancient hills could throw at a man. Bears, flash floods, lost hikers, even the occasional moonshiners still hidden back in some forgotten hollow. But I never believed the old stories. The mountain folk around here have always been full of tales about witches and haints and things that go bump in the night. I figured they were just ways to explain what people didn't understand back in the old days. I should have listened to those stories. It was September of 1989 when everything changed. The harvest moon hung fat and orange over the Smokies, and the air had that strange quality you sometimes get in early fall, warm during the day, but dropping to near freezing after dark. Weather that made no sense, like the mountains themselves couldn't make up their minds what season it was supposed to be. I was working the Cades Cove area, my usual beat, 27 square miles of some of the most beautiful country God ever made, full of old cabins and churches that told the story of the mountain people who'd lived here before the park was established. That was my specialty, cultural resources, they called it. Keeping track of the old homesteads and family graveyards, making sure history didn't just fade away into the forest. My supervisor, Bill Crawford, called me into his office that Tuesday morning with a frown creasing his weathered face. Bill had been with the Park Service since before I was born, and not much rattled him, but something had him spooked. "Bob," he said, sliding a manila folder across his desk, "we got a problem down in Witch's Hollow." I'd heard the name before but never paid it much mind. It was an unmarked valley, about 5 miles southeast of the main Cades Cove loop, accessible only by foot and surrounded by ridges too steep for all but the most experienced hikers. The kind of place that stayed off the tourist maps. "What kind of problem?" I asked, opening the folder. Inside were photographs of what looked like vandalism, old headstones knocked over, graves disturbed, historical markers defaced. "Hikers found it 3 days ago," Bill explained. "Reported it to the main office, but nobody's been down there to investigate yet. Thing is, that valley's been untouched for decades. No trail maintenance, no visitor access. Hell, most people don't even know it exists." I studied the photos. The damage was extensive but strange. The headstones weren't just knocked over, they were arranged in precise patterns, like someone had moved them on purpose. And the graves, something about the way the earth was disturbed, didn't look like normal vandalism. You want me to hike down there and assess the damage? I asked. Bill nodded, but his expression stayed troubled. Thing is, Bob, that valley's got a reputation. Local families have been avoiding it for generations. They call it cursed. I almost laughed. Come on, Bill. You don't believe that old nonsense. I don't believe in curses, he said carefully, but I believe in people's reactions to them. The mountain folk around here won't set foot in that hollow, haven't for over 100 years. So who's been down there disturbing those graves? That was a good question. I closed the folder and stood up. I'll head down there this afternoon, take some better pictures, see if I can figure out what happened. Take your radio, Bill said. And Bob, be careful. Something about this whole situation doesn't feel right. I should have asked him what he meant by that, should have pressed him for details about the valley's reputation. But I was confident in my abilities, proud of my experience. I'd been hiking these mountains since I was old enough to walk, following the same trails my great-grandfather had used when he hunted these hills. My family had been in these mountains for 5 generations. I figured I knew them as well as anybody. The drive to the trailhead took 20 minutes along winding park roads that seemed darker than usual under the thick canopy. I parked at a maintenance area that most tourists never saw and checked my gear: radio, first aid kit, camera, water, and the .357 revolver I carried for protection against bears. The weapon felt heavier than usual as I strapped on the holster. The trail started as an old logging road from the 1,920 but quickly deteriorated into something that was barely a deer path. The forest closed in around me as I hiked, massive oak and hickory trees forming a green tunnel that blocked out most of the afternoon sun. The silence was the first thing I noticed. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, none of the normal sounds you'd expect in healthy woodland. After about 2 miles, the path began to descend sharply. The trees changed too, becoming older and more twisted, with thick vines hanging like curtains between the trunks. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I found myself walking through patches of cold air that felt like invisible pools of winter. That's when I saw the first stone circle. It was about 10 feet across, made of river rocks that had been carefully placed in a perfect ring around a flat area of earth. Definitely not natural, but old enough that moss had grown over most of the stones. I photographed it from several angles, noting how the circle was positioned at what felt like a natural crossroads in the valley. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, though I couldn't say why. Beyond the stone circle, the valley opened up into the hollow proper. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed way, a natural bowl maybe half a mile across, with a clear stream running down the middle and the remains of old homesteads scattered throughout. I could see the damage the hikers had reported. Overturned headstones in what had once been a family cemetery, and beyond that, the ruins of what looked like a cabin foundation. But something was wrong with the whole scene. It took me a few minutes to figure out what it was. The stream was running backward. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Streams don't run uphill. It's impossible. But the water in that creek was definitely flowing from the low end of the valley toward the high end, defying every law of physics I'd learned in school. I walked closer, thinking maybe it was just an optical illusion caused by the angle of the land or the way shadows fell across the water. But no, the stream was genuinely flowing uphill, carrying leaves and small sticks along with it in the wrong direction. The water itself looked normal enough, clear mountain water over a rocky bottom, but its behavior made my stomach clench with unease. I keyed my radio to call it in, but got nothing except static. That wasn't unusual, this deep in the mountains. Radio signals had trouble getting through all the ridges and valleys. Still, I made a note to report the equipment failure when I got back to the station. The cemetery was my next stop. 7 headstones, ranging from the 1,840 seconds to the 1,890 seconds, all bearing the same family name, Whitmore. Pioneer families who'd tried to make a life in this remote valley and apparently hadn't lasted long. The oldest grave belonged to Ezra Whitmore, who died in 1847 at age 32. The newest was a child, Sarah Whitmore, dead at age 7 in 1891. But the stones hadn't just been knocked over randomly. Someone had arranged them in the same kind of circle pattern I'd seen at the valley entrance, with the child's headstone placed carefully in the center. The earth around the graves had been disturbed, but not in the chaotic way you'd expect from vandals. It looked almost ceremonial. I was photographing the scene when I heard the first scream. It came from somewhere deeper in the minute. Hollow, a sound like a woman in terrible distress. My blood went cold, and I dropped the camera to grab my radio. "Base, this is Thornton," I called. "I've got a possible emergency situation in Witch's Hollow. Requesting backup." Static, nothing but static. The scream came again, longer this time, echoing off the valley walls in a way that made it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. But it was definitely human, definitely female, and definitely in pain. I drew my revolver and started moving toward the sound, following what looked like an old footpath that led deeper into the hollow. The screaming continued, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always just around the next bend or behind the next cluster of trees. That's when I found the cabin. It was tucked back against the far wall of the valley, hidden by a grove of ancient hemlocks that grew so thick they blocked out the sky. Unlike the other ruins I'd seen, this structure was mostly intact log, walls still standing, roof partially collapsed but holding, windows that were just dark holes staring out at the forest. The screaming was coming from inside. "Hello?" I called out, approaching with my weapon drawn. "This is the Park Service. Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I waited, listening, but heard nothing except my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The cabin door was standing open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Every instinct I had was telling me not to go in there, but if someone was hurt, I had a duty to help. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped through the doorway. The interior was a single room, maybe 20 feet square, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. The floor was covered with dried leaves and forest debris, and something had been living in there. I could smell the musky scent of wild animals. But in the center of the room, cleared of debris, was another stone circle. This one was much more elaborate than the others, with symbols carved into the rocks and what looked like the remains of old candles arranged around the perimeter. And in the center of the circle was a pile of bones. They were old, yellowed with age, but they were definitely human. I could see the curve of a skull, the long bones of arms and legs, ribs scattered like broken sticks. My hands were shaking as I tried to photograph the scene, but the camera flash seemed to make the shadows dance in ways that hurt my eyes. That's when I heard the breathing. It was coming from behind me, slow and deep, like something large trying to stay quiet. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing except the open doorway and the forest beyond. The breathing continued. I backed toward the door, weapon ready, light sweeping the corners of the room. But whatever was making that sound wasn't visible. The breathing seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the log walls in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint. I was almost to the doorway when the temperature dropped 30 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the inside of the cabin windows. The breathing sound got louder, more labored, and I could swear I felt something brush against the back of my neck. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran out of that cabin like the devil himself was chasing me, crashed through the underbrush, stumbled over fallen logs, scratched my face on low-hanging branches in my haste to get away from whatever was in there with me. Didn't stop running until I was back at the cemetery, gasping for air and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The sun was setting, painting the sky a deep orange that made the shadows in the hollow seem to writhe and move. I needed to get out of there, to get back to civilization and report what I'd found. But as I started back toward the trail, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The headstones had moved. They were no longer arranged in a circle. Instead, they formed a straight line pointing directly at the cabin I'd just fled from, like a row of stone fingers accusing the darkness of harboring something terrible. I hadn't touched those headstones, hadn't even gotten close enough to disturb them. But somehow, while I was in that cabin, something had rearranged them with mathematical precision. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen in that hollow, the impossible stream, the arranged headstones, that pile of bones in the cabin. But mostly, I kept hearing that breathing sound. Slow and deliberate, like something waiting in the darkness. Bill was in early the next morning, and I caught him before he'd even had his coffee. I laid out the photos on his desk, the stone circles, the disturbed cemetery, the bones in the cabin. But when I tried to explain about the headstones moving by themselves, I saw the doubt creep into his eyes. "Stress can play tricks on your mind, Bob," he said carefully. "That's a lot to process in one afternoon. Maybe you just remembered the arrangement wrong." "I know what I saw," I insisted. "Something's not right down there." Bill studied the photos for a long time, paying special attention to the bone pile. "These look old," he said finally. "Could be remains from the original settlers. We'll need to get the state archaeologist involved. Document everything properly." "What about the other things? The stream flowing uphill, the temperature changes?" "Underground springs can create unusual water flow patterns," Bill said. "And these mountains are full of limestone caves. Could be you walk through a cold air draft coming up from below." He was giving me rational explanations for everything, and maybe he was right. Maybe I'd let the isolation and the spooky reputation of the place get to me. But I knew what I'd experienced, and it wasn't natural. "I want to go back down there," I said. "Take some equipment, document everything properly." Bill looked like he wanted to say no, but we both knew the bones alone were enough to justify a thorough investigation. "Take someone with you," he said finally, "and don't go alone." That's how I ended up hiking back into Witch's Hollow the next day with Jenny Martinez, a young ranger who'd transferred in from Yellowstone 6 months earlier. Jenny was smart, tough, and skeptical of ghost stories, which made her perfect for the job. I'd also brought a digital thermometer, a compass, and a small video camera to supplement my regular equipment. The weather had turned strange again, warm and humid in the morning, but with an odd quality to the air that made it hard to breathe deeply. Storm clouds were building on the horizon, dark and heavy despite the Weather Service's prediction of clear skies. Jenny noticed the silence as soon as we entered the hollow. "Where are all the birds?" she asked, looking up at the empty canopy. "That's what I was wondering yesterday," I said. "The whole ecosystem feels disturbed." We started with the stone circle at the valley entrance. In daylight, with a second person to witness, it looked less mysterious but more deliberately constructed. The stones were all river rock, but they'd been shaped and fitted with careful precision. Jenny ran her hands over the surfaces, feeling for tool marks. "This is old work," she said. "Pre-industrial, but skilled. Native American, maybe, or early European settlers with stoneworking experience." The stream was still flowing uphill. Jenny stared at it for several minutes, walking up and down the bank to check the grade of the land. "That's impossible," she said finally. "That's what I thought." She knelt by the water's edge and tossed in a bring stick. We watched it float steadily upstream, carried by a current that shouldn't exist. The digital thermometer showed the water temperature at 38 degrees, much colder than it should have been for September. "There has to be an explanation," Jenny muttered, but she sounded less certain than she had that morning. The cemetery told the next part of the story. The headstones were back in their circle formation, just like I'd found them the first day. Jenny photographed everything while I took measurements, documenting the precise spacing and alignment. Each stone was exactly 6 feet from its neighbors, and the circle was oriented with astronomical precision toward magnetic north. "This is deliberate," Jenny said. "Someone's been maintaining this arrangement. But who? There's no trail access, no vehicle access. How would anyone get down here regularly?" She didn't have an answer for that. The cabin was our last stop, and I could tell Jenny felt the wrongness of it as soon as we approached. The temperature around the structure was 15 degrees cooler than the surrounding forest, and our breath came out in visible puffs despite the warm afternoon air. "Something died in there," Jenny said, wrinkling her nose at the smell that drifted from the doorway. "Something big." But when we entered with our flashlights, we found the bone pile exactly as I'd left it: old human remains. Decades or maybe centuries old, arranged in the center of the stone circle. Nothing fresh. Nothing that could account for the smell of decay. Jenny was kneeling by the bones, taking careful photographs, when the first candle lit itself. It was one of the old stubs arranged around the stone circle, just a nub of wax that shouldn't have had a wick anymore. But a flame appeared on top of it, flickering yellow and casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. "Did you light that?" I asked, knowing she hadn't. "No," she whispered. A second candle lit, then a third. Within seconds, The entire circle was ablaze with candle flames that had appeared from nowhere. The temperature in the cabin dropped another 20 degrees, and frost began forming on the log walls. That's when we heard the footsteps on the roof. They started slow, deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth above our heads. But the footsteps were wrong, too heavy, too spaced out, like whatever was making them had legs much longer than human legs should be. Jenny grabbed my arm, her face pale in the candlelight. "We need to leave. Now." The footsteps stopped directly above us. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat and Jenny's rapid breathing. Then came a sound I'll never forget, fingernails dragging across wood, long scraping sounds like something with claws was trying to tear through the roof. The candles went out all at once, plunging us into darkness. We ran, crashed through the cabin door and into the forest, stumbling over roots and rocks in our haste to get away. Behind us, I could hear something large moving through the trees, branches breaking, leaves rustling, something keeping pace with us, but staying just out of sight. We didn't stop running until we reached the valley entrance. Only then did I dare to look back, and what I saw nearly made my legs give out. The entire hollow was filled with fog, a thick white mist that hadn't been there when we'd entered. But it wasn't natural fog. It moved with purpose, flowing in spirals and patterns that hurt to look at directly. And in the center of that unnatural mist, I could see a dark shape, tall and angular, with flowing hair and clothing that seemed to merge with the fog itself. The shape was watching us. "Jesus Christ," Jenny whispered. "What is that thing?" I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we were looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that had been waiting in that hollow for a very long time, something that didn't want us there. The fog began moving toward us, flowing up the valley like a living thing. We ran for the trail, and this time we didn't stop until we reached the parking area and the safety of our vehicle. As we drove away, I looked back one last time and saw the fog spilling over the ridgeline, reaching toward us with tendrils of white mist that dissipated in the normal air beyond the hollow's boundaries. Whatever lived in Witch's Hollow, it was contained there. For now. But I had a terrible feeling that our intrusion had awakened something that had been sleeping for a very long time. 3 days passed before I worked up the courage to return to Witch's Hollow. And this time I didn't go alone. Jenny had requested a transfer back to Yellowstone the morning after our encounter, packed her things, and left without so much as a goodbye. Bill assigned me a partner from the main office, a senior ranger named Dave Kowalski, who'd worked these mountains longer than anyone. Dave had gray hair and careful eyes, and when I briefed him on what we'd found, he listened without interrupting or offering rational explanations. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "My grandmother was Cherokee," he said finally. "Grew up hearing the old stories about this valley. According to tribal history, there was a woman who came here in the 1842, a settler woman who'd lost her family to disease. The Cherokee tried to warn her away, said the valley was sacred ground, protected by spirits that didn't welcome outsiders. What happened to her? She wouldn't leave. Set up a homestead, started practicing what the locals called mountain magic. Dark things calling up storms, speaking with the dead, making bargains with powers that should have been left alone. The Cherokee stopped coming to this valley entirely. Said she'd corrupted it somehow. I thought about the Whitmore headstones, the family that had tried to settle in the hollow. When did this woman disappear? That's the thing, Dave said. According to the stories, she never did disappear. She became something else, a guardian of the valley, a sentinel that kept watch over her territory and dealt harshly with anyone who disturbed it. We hiked in, armed with more equipment than a simple archaeological survey should have required: digital cameras, motion sensors, electromagnetic field detectors, and Dave's grandfather's old Winchester rifle alongside my revolver. The weather had turned cold overnight, with a cutting wind that made the trees creak and sway ominously. The hollow was different from my previous visits. The fog was gone, but the very air seemed thicker, more oppressive. The silence was absolute: no insects, no bird calls, not even the sound of wind moving through the trees. It was like stepping into a photograph of a forest rather than an actual living ecosystem. The stone circle at the entrance had been disturbed. The carefully placed river rocks were scattered in a rough line, pointing deeper into the valley, like an arrow showing us the way forward. But more unsettling were the symbols carved into the earth, where the circle had been angular marks that looked almost like letters but weren't from any alphabet I recognized. Dave knelt by the symbols, running his fingers over the carved earth. "Cherokee script," he said grimly. "But old dialect. This says something like, 'Keeper of the Dead.'" The stream was no longer flowing uphill. Now it wasn't flowing at all. The water sat perfectly still, like a mirror reflecting the gray sky. When I tossed a stone into it, the splash echoed strangely, as if the sound was bouncing off invisible walls. The cemetery had been transformed. The 7 headstones now stood in a perfect row facing the dark cabin, but someone had carved additional symbols into each stone, the same angular marks we'd found at the entrance. And behind each headstone, the earth had been disturbed again, fresh digging, with small mounds of dirt piled neatly beside each grave. "Someone's been busy," Dave muttered, photographing the scene. That's when I noticed the footprints. They led from each disturbed grave toward the cabin, but they weren't normal human tracks. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the toe ends. And they were accompanied by drag marks, as if someone had been pulling heavy objects along the ground. We followed the trail toward the cabin, and what we found there made my stomach turn. The bone pile from the stone circle was gone, but now there were 7 distinct mounds of bones arranged around the outside of the structure, one for each grave in the cemetery. Human remains that had been carefully sorted and organized, skulls placed on top like grotesque sentinels. "She's calling them back," Dave said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The witch, she's raising the dead." The cabin itself was transformed too. The roof had been partially repaired with fresh timber, and the windows had been fitted with new glass that reflected our faces with disturbing clarity. Smoke was rising from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning herbs, and something else, something organic and foul. Dave raised his rifle as we approached the door, and I drew my revolver. The door was closed now, painted with more of those angular symbols and what looked like dried blood. "Last chance to turn back," I said. Dave's jaw was set in a hard line. "If she's waking up the dead, we can't let her continue. No telling what she might do to the living." I reached for the door handle, and it opened at my touch. Beyond was a room that bore no resemblance to the abandoned cabin I'd explored before. The space was clean, furnished with handmade wooden furniture, and lit by dozens of candles arranged in precise geometric patterns. A fire burned in the hearth, and someone was sitting in a big rocking chair beside it. She was tall, maybe 7 feet, with long gray hair that flowed like water down her back. Her dress was made from what looked like burial shrouds sewn together, and her skin was pale as moonlight. When she turned to look at us, I saw eyes that were completely black, no iris, no pupil, just endless darkness that seemed to pull at my soul. "You came back?" she said, and her voice was like wind through dead leaves. "I wondered if you would." Dave raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking. "You need to stop this. Whatever you're doing here, it needs to end." She smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous for a human mouth. "End? I'm just beginning. Do you know how long I've been alone in this valley? How long I've been waiting for someone to help me finish my work?" "What work?" I demanded. "Waking my family," she said, gesturing toward the windows. Through the glass, I could see shapes moving in the forest, tall, angular, figures that walked with jerky, unnatural gaits. The dead from the cemetery, animated by whatever power this creature commanded. They've been sleeping so long. But now they're ready to leave this place, to find new homes among the living. The cabin began to shake, and I heard the sound of footsteps on the roof again, multiple sets this time, heavy and deliberate. The reanimated corpses were surrounding us, cutting off any possibility of escape. "You have a choice," the witch said, rising from her chair to her full, impossible height. "Join my family willingly, and I'll make your transformation quick and painless. Resist, and you'll spend eternity as my servants, aware of what you've become but unable to control your actions." That's when Dave did something I'll never forget. Instead of shooting at the witch, he turned his rifle on the candles arranged around the room and started firing, shattering wax and flame in explosive bursts. The carefully maintained patterns were disrupted, and immediately the witch's scream of rage shattered the windows. "The candles!" he shouted. "They're anchoring her power." I understood and began shooting too, targeting the largest candles and the most complex arrangements. With each flame we extinguished, The witch became less solid, more translucent. The footsteps on the roof became frantic, and I could hear her dead family members clawing at the door and walls, trying to get inside to stop us. But we were faster. Within seconds, every candle in the room was destroyed, and the witch was fading like smoke in the wind. "This isn't over," she hissed as she dissolved. "I'll find another way. I'll call others to take your place." The door burst open, and the reanimated corpses stumbled inside, but with their mistress gone, they were just empty shells. They collapsed in a tangle of old bones and rotting cloth, finally at rest. We burned the cabin that day, used every match, every piece of flammable material we could find to reduce the structure to ash and charcoal. The bone piles we buried properly, with words Dave remembered from Cherokee burial rituals and prayers I recalled from my childhood church. It seemed like the least we could do for the Whitmore family. The stream started flowing normally again as soon as the witch was gone, running downhill like streams are supposed to do. The stone circles crumbled into ordinary rock piles, and birds began singing in the trees for the first time in decades. But I knew our victory was temporary. Creatures like that don't stay dead for long, especially in places of power like Witch's Hollow. I submitted a report recommending that the valley be permanently closed to public access. Cited archaeological sensitivity and unstable terrain, which wasn't entirely untrue. The state archaeologist never got involved. Somehow, the paperwork disappeared, and the bones we'd photographed were written off as animal remains that had been misidentified in Boff. Poor lighting. Dave retired 3 weeks later, said he was too old to deal with things that shouldn't exist. We never talked about what we'd seen, but sometimes I catch him looking at me across the station with an expression that says he's remembering that dark cabin and the thing that lived there. I still patrol that area, but I've never hiked back down into the hollow itself. The trail has grown over, blocked by fallen trees and thick underbrush, as if the forest is trying to hide the entrance. Sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the wind is blowing from the southeast, I think I can hear singing coming from that direction, a woman's voice, low and mournful, calling to the darkness. Last month, a family of hikers reported seeing strange lights in that area. Described them as candles floating through the trees, arranged in geometric patterns. I investigated, of course, but found nothing except some scorched earth where our fire had burned the cabin down. The lights were back the next night. I've been thinking about requesting a transfer, maybe to a park out west where the only supernatural threats are tourist legends and campfire stories. But someone needs to keep watch over Witch's Hollow, to make sure whatever's stirring down there doesn't find its way out into the wider world. My son thinks I've become paranoid, jumpier than I used to be. He's not wrong. Every shadow could hide something unnatural. Every unexplained sound could be the first sign that she's found a way back. Because I know now that evil like that doesn't just disappear, it waits, it adapts, it finds new ways to spread its influence. Sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, I wonder if we really stopped her at all, or if we just forced her to be more careful, more patient in her plans. The thought keeps me awake, staring out at the mountains and listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. 19 years I've been a ranger in these hills, and I thought I understood them. Now I know better. The Smoky Mountains are old, older than human memory, and they hold secrets that would drive a man mad if he learned them all. Some valleys are meant to stay empty. Some stories are meant to remain untold. But I'm telling this one because people need to know. If you ever find yourself hiking in the backcountry and you come across a place that feels wrong, too quiet, too cold, where the very air seems to press against your chest, turn around and leave. Don't investigate. Don't take pictures. Don't try to rationalize what you're seeing. Just run and don't look back. Because some things that sleep in the deep hollows of the world are better left undisturbed. And some guardians never truly die. They just wait for their next opportunity to remind the living that death is not always the end. The Witch of Witch's Hollow taught me that lesson, and it's one I'll carry with me for the rest of my days. However, many of those I have left